Is Zelensky responsible for the stalled progress, or what's going on there?
Well, he's got to read the proposal. He hasn't read it
the most
yet.
recent draft.
That's as of yesterday. And maybe he's read it over the night. It would be nice if he would read it. You know, a lot of people are dying, so it would be really good if he'd read it. His people loved the proposal. They really liked it. His lieutenants, his top people, they liked it. But they said he hasn't read it yet. I think he should find time to read it.
Okay.
Well, he's going to have to get on the ball and start accepting things. You know?
US President Donald Trump there saying that basically Zelensky is the obstacle to a peace deal in Ukraine. On top of that, in that interview later on, Donald Trump called for new elections for the presidency in Ukraine, even though they're not possible under the current state of martial law in Ukraine. So what is going on? Why does Donald Trump seem to want to see the end of Vladimir Zelensky as Ukrainian president? So according to the law in Ukraine, we have martial law, which means there are restrictions because of wartime. Russia invaded in 2022, and the day after the 24th of February 2022 invasion, the government introduced martial law, and as part of that, it is not possible to hold elections for the Ukrainian presidency. And Vladimir Zelensky has been in power now for longer than his original mandate, and Donald Trump has, in the last, we'll say, month or so, launched a new round of endeavors to get to a deal in Ukraine. And we start off by reviewing the 28-point plan. There's been several other plans. We haven't really seen the details of the others being confirmed, just leaks in the media. However, as I commented in the last few videos, one of the main points that the Trump administration is pushing on Ukraine is de jure recognizing current occupied territory as being legally Russian, and that they retreat from the remaining part of Donbass that's currently under Ukrainian control. That, along with many of the other points that these peace proposals have been outlining, are completely unacceptable to Ukraine. Zelensky in the last few days has made that very clear, that he is definitely not going to sign over any territory to Russia legally or withdraw from Donbass. Donbass is quite important for the Ukrainians in terms of the cities they still control there, because they're known as the fortress cities. They have them heavily fortified, and it's estimated that at the current rate of Russian progress, it would take them 2 to 3 years to actually conquer the remaining parts of the Donbass, and probably they would suffer hundreds of thousands of additional casualties. So Ukraine doesn't see much value in signing a peace proposal that wouldn't guarantee them security and actually maybe end up saving the Russian army about 2 years of fighting, 2 to 3 years of fighting. So Zelensky, as I explained in the other video, it's not just Zelensky. There isn't any sort of legal way for Zelensky to even sign it over on his own. He would have to get the Rada, the Ukrainian parliament, to agree, and it does not appear like there is much appetite in the Ukrainian parliament to agree to such concessions, especially with the current situation on the front, which is that Russia makes very slow progress, and there is no current indication that Russia would overrun Ukrainian defenders. So on top of that, there isn't any indication that there is popular support amongst the Ukrainian public in order to make these concessions. So it is interesting that Donald Trump focuses so much and echoes Kremlin talking points that they need to have elections in Ukraine. That would be better, basically, if there was a different president to Zelensky. However, if you look at the opinion polls, the two other candidates that would be most likely to run and win against Zelensky, they are actually behind him in the opinion polls, but still they would be potential challengers, are the former head of the Ukrainian military, Valery Zaluzhny, and the current head of Ukrainian intelligence, which is Budanov. So both of those are even less likely, presumably, to sign an agreement which would involve legally recognizing any occupied territory as Russian or withdrawing from the Donbass region voluntarily. So it is a bit curious that Donald Trump would make such a big deal about, I mean, this is not the first time he's been trying to suggest that there should be elections, that basically they be good if there were a new president in Ukraine. However, if there were a free and fair election, which is basically impossible in the current circumstances, because how would you organize it with the amount of daily bombing that so many Ukrainian cities suffer from, plus you got lots of occupied territory, plus you got the actual fighting, then what kind of candidate does Donald Trump think it would be better as an alternative to Zelensky? Maybe he has some sort of pro-Russian candidate in mind, and that would dovetail with obviously the interests of the Kremlin. We've had the national security strategy outlined by Donald Trump. At least he signed off on it last week, where basically he didn't state that Russia was an adversary at all and he was looking for some sort of settlement and stability with Russia, but he did identify political interference into US's allies in Europe, in their political systems, as being part of the strategy. That would suggest that might be what he would have in mind, is to try and have some sort of Manchurian candidate take over Ukraine. I just can't see how that would be realistic, considering who is popular in Ukraine as an alternative to Zelensky. They are presumably less likely to agree to sign over any territory or withdraw from fortified positions. So it seems a bit of a pipe dream. On top of that, in the meantime, since Donald Trump gave this interview to Dasha Burns for Politico, it was maybe 2 evenings ago at this point, Vladimir Zelensky has come out and said, well, I'm actually prepared to host an election. We just need American security guarantees that basically would ensure, or European security guarantees that would ensure that we would have free and fair elections. That obviously passes the ball back to the other side of the court, to the European and American partners, if we can still call the US a partner of Ukraine, in terms of actually providing conditions where such elections could take place. Russia, for their part, from what I could see, their officials are saying there is no way they're going to agree to a ceasefire to allow any elections take place. So this seems to have been a pretty shrewd strategic move by the Ukrainian president to say, sure, I'll have elections, just make sure that we have the conditions on the ground to allow them to take place freely and fairly, and he would be up for that. So Russia doesn't want to see a ceasefire at all at the moment, definitely doesn't want to see one for several weeks, maybe even several months, because presumably candidates would have to be able to campaign. You have all the soldiers who are fighting, how those people going to either run for office or even campaign. Then you have the people in the occupied territories, as I said. So it would be a complete mess, and it would take a long time to actually set this up, I think, realistically. Plus, you would need a ceasefire, which means Russia wouldn't be bombing the cities or presumably fighting on the front for several months. And that is something Russia doesn't want to do, because Vladimir Putin wants to see, even if it's glacial progress at the front, he feels like that is still a benefit to him to keep the pressure up in spite of the huge casualties. So, in general, whilst Donald Trump seems to have a personal dislike in general for Volodymyr Zelensky, we all remember the Oval Office diplomatic debacle that took place earlier in the year, where basically they got in a shouting match, and Donald Trump was extremely disrespectful to his guest in terms of how he treated him. He's never treated any other political leader the same way. Maybe the South African leader was also quite antagonistic towards. But Vladimir Putin came to the United States, came to Alaska, and got the red carpet treatment from Donald Trump. Quite a contrast. However, his personal animus towards Zelensky doesn't seem to have any sound strategic thinking behind it, because what is he expecting? They're going to be able to put in a candidate that's pro-Russian, that's going to read to these basically ridiculous terms. It would be like the Sudetenland after mass killing in terms of appeasement. And I just don't see how any legitimately elected leader in Ukraine is going to do this. On top of that, Vladimir Zelensky is under pressure because of a big corruption scandal surrounding Ukrainian tax money that was supposed to go to protecting the energy infrastructure here in Ukraine. And that has been blown up once again by the Kremlin, by Russia. And this is also why I'm shooting this video so late, because my electricity was off earlier. So it is something that has really rankled the Ukrainian public. So he is in an even weaker position to make any sort of compromise, because he doesn't have that much political capital, because he has lost some popularity recently with this corruption scandal. And in general, whenever Vladimir Zelensky has stood up to Donald Trump, like back when they had this crisis in the Oval Office, he's actually become more popular with the Ukrainian public. So by Donald Trump creating the situation where he's trying to force an election, and Zelensky, and also trying to get him to agree to very unreasonable demands and concessions in his peace proposal, he's actually more likely to increase the popularity of Vladimir Zelensky. And now he finds himself in a situation that if he were to somehow convince the Russians to allow a ceasefire, to allow the conditions to be set for an election, the alternatives that would run and probably get elected would be even less likely to compromise. So I'm not sure how he really thinks this is going to pan out in his advantage. However, I will say Vladimir Zelensky took that surprise move by saying he would be open to organizing the elections, probably knowing that it's a non-starter because Russia won't agree to a ceasefire, and the Americans are not likely to agree, nor the Europeans, to actually create conditions on the ground to allow it to take place. So that's what I'll say about the situation between Zelensky and Donald Trump. No doubt Donald Trump will continue intermittently with being very harsh on the current Ukrainian president. Let me know what you think down below about the current situation. You think the peace proposal have any chance of going anywhere? My prediction, since we saw the 28-point plan and the leaks of the 19-point plan, and others presumably maybe even today a new plan again, is that it is going absolutely nowhere diplomatically, because the situation on the battlefield is in the situation of an impasse. Russia's making this very slow progress at huge cost over the last few years since they retreated out of the Kharkiv Oblast and out of the city of Kherson. And they've taken maybe a percentage point or two of Ukrainian territory, with the loss of hundreds of thousands of soldiers killed, wounded, and missing. So until that situation is resolved in one side's favor, where one side definitely has the upper hand, I cannot see Vladimir Putin being willing to engage in any serious peace negotiations or any serious attempts to get the fighting stopped, because he just thinks that, from his point of view, his regime is more secure by trying to push forward than by accepting a ceasefire in any sort of realistic terms, because Ukraine also is not in a position where they feel they have to capitulate. So, led to that, Slava Ukraini, Rom Slava do Peremoghi.